page 196. At an earlier passage, the seed was already once used as an allegory in order to explain the union of two factors, which within themselves form a oneness into a hyper-oneness. And once more the seed shall now serve as an allegory. Depending on the type of seed, firmer or softer, the germination process takes longer or less time. Before the germination, however, first the arduous work is necessary in order to loosen up the ground and to make it airy. The fertility of the ground must thereby also be taken into account, because a seed is only able to germinate in sustainable earth. After the preparation and loosening of the earth, the sower walks over the brown soil and throws the seed with his or her swinging hand into the womb of the earth. In the fertile ground, it is moistened by rainwater and warmed by the sun's rays. Absorbing moisture and warmth in itself, it begins to enliven itself, to develop, to germinate, in order to slowly grow into a useful fruit. Placed in the earth, the seed begins to absorb the moisture of the earth that has been produced by the rain, softening its hulls, and allowing it to burst forth from the inside out of the swelling seed. Through external influence, the seed therefore begins to live and to work and to germinate within itself. The precipitating rain, the warmth providing rays of sunshine, and the climatizing winds have created the preconditions for this. The seed thus develops into a living sprout, which in turn develops sprout roots and lowers them into the soil in a manner that they find stability and nourishment. Having thereby become capable of absorbing larger amounts of nourishment, it is able to further develop rapidly and to bring forth green shoots. Powerfully they grow towards the light, break through the earth, and absorb the light and the warmth of the sun's rays into itself. Through this, further and new powers develop again, and from the initial sprouts and shoots, slender leaves and stalks grow, which grow towards the sun. Soon they will already be tall and slim and form a crown full of grains as completion of their growth. The number of the grains will be 100-fold more than the individual seed was. However, the process of growth thereby has not yet ended, because the previous occurrences do not yet result in the relative absolute fulfillment. The fully grown crown of the fruit represents only the relative absolute fulfillment of the material life, from which the creational, in the sense of the re-creation, branch off. In order to achieve this creational, the fruit crown now must first ripen. Through innumerable external influences and the sun's rays, the grains absorb many different powers into themselves and form towards the ripeness. First soft and seemingly watery, they harden themselves and store the accumulated powers within themselves. Changing in color, they slowly take on the hue of their mother seed, from which they were indeed developed, and grow into firm individual grains and the mass of the crown. Once they have finally ripened, they hold within themselves all the capabilities of the creation capability, the procreation of new things. If these ripened grains fall into fertile earth, then new fruit in turn develops from them, as this has already been explained by the individual seed. The growth of the fruit from the individual seed embodies the same process which is inherent to the human being in consciousness-based and in spiritual form. The stages of development, circumstances, and preconditions differ only in the life form, because only this is different. The laws and recommendations of the development, however, remain unifiedly the same. Whether a seed is used as an allegory, or the bulb of a flower, etc., it does not play a role because everything lives and develops according to the same laws and recommendations of creational brazen regulation. The difference between the most varied life lies only in their form, but never in varying laws and recommendations, for these are universally unified. The earth human being, as a self-thinking life form, however, is able to steer and to influence their evolution consciously, as well as unconsciously, whereby they are also capable of disregarding and contravening the existing laws and recommendations of the creation, through which they, however, become incapable of life and sink into the abyss. Therefore, the human being of the present time regards the development of the seed only as a natural process, and rejoices with material underpinnings when the harvest becomes quite large and rich. The development of the seed has become a simple, natural occurrence for them, the true background of which is completely unknown to them, the human beings, because they have forced it into oblivion. All knowledge about the existing and enlivening laws and recommendations through which the life in the seed can only then be awakened is forced into forgottenness within him or her. He or she is simply, through the prevalence of irrational teachings and disinterest, forgotten this sense of the whole, and degraded the all-embracing creation to an imaginary human God. The truly searching and researching and even knowing human being who tries to look deeper cannot confront him or herself with the usual assumption, the beliefs, and the unreal customary views and considerations regarding ordinary natural occurrences and natural processes. Therefore, he or she does not simply look at and consider the seed as a thing from which fruit arises, but rather as a life form of creational origin. Therefore, he or she also looks at and considers the seed according to its kind and knows its difference to other seeds. Even if there are often no or only minor differences recognizable when looked at and considered from the outside, there are thus, nevertheless, fundamentally different powers living in them, which, however, in turn develop according to the same creational laws and recommendations and external influences. The truly searching and researching, or knowing human being, however, realizes that the same law, recommendation, and life prerequisites do not have the slightest influence on an equal forming process of different types of seeds, so that a different kind of fruit could arise from it. A grain of wheat is therefore neither able to develop oats, nor barley, or flax, but only wheat in turn. Indeed, the earth human beings have, through their sciences, recognized the seeds as germ-bearing forms, but they were never able to recognize or to comprehend the actual life in them. Since the human beings search in purely material values, their cognition capabilities are also embedded in the same values. They will only then find a solution to the mystery when they work their way into the spiritual and creational levels and seek the truth there, where it is truly to be found. They are, however, not yet so far and possess only the knowledge that in the small hull of the seed the life-bearer is embedded and expresses itself visibly as a germ. But the sprout is only the visible part of the life-bearer, the actual body of the newly developing fruit. The life-bearer itself is still invisible to the human eye, because the human being must first learn to use his or her eyes for the insight of spiritual life. Although these capabilities again and again break through unconsciously with some earth human beings, so that they are able to see spiritual forms, yet the understanding is lacking in them in order to recognize and to analyze this spiritual life in its real forms. And when the life-bearer is spoken of here, then it is not of those in material form, the germ itself, but rather of the spiritual life-bearer, which makes itself noticeable in everything as spirit energy and embodiment of brazen regulation, laws, and recommendation of creational origin. In the earth human being, therefore, the spirit form, respectively, the spirit itself. It alone forms the life-bearer, filled up with creational power, which the creation has given to each of its creations, as an idea, and has put into them. The earth human beings describe the powers in all things as phenomena in all life forms, and they describe their life as nature spirit. Here she calls the characteristic of the seed as a life-bearer, the law of nature, without further thinking about it, through which he or she also refrains from answering the question as to what is the cause of the existence of the life-bearer altogether. Thereby they miss the clarification that within the life-bearer the universal power of the creation is anchored, and only through this power does the life-bearer become capable of life. When the earth human being now relates the allegory of the seed to him or herself and looks at and considers it precisely, then the following results. The germ of life in the human being is creational spirit energy, created by the creation, and filled with its power, filled with all creational laws and recommendations in brazen regulation, for the preservation of this brazen regulation. These laws and recommendations, in connection with all external and internal occurrences of the life, guarantee the certainty that the germ can be developed, takes root, grows, and ripens. The spirit in the human being absorbs the external impressions, happenings, and occurrences, etc., into itself and processes them, just like the seed, into a germ, from which roots and the plant develop. According to the external influences and the capability of the life-bearer, the plant, or the human being, develops magnificently or less magnificently. Since the earth human being now, however, represents a self-thinking life form, it lies in his or her own capability to develop him or herself negatively or positively, viably or not viably. It is inherent to and given to the thinking life form alone to create a conscious will for certain things and to influence their existence and their development according to their ability and capability, while all other life forms are dependent on effects and influences without being able to autonomously choose a determined conscious direction of development. In connection with the inner life germ and all external influences, etc., and with his or her own autonomous thinking capability, the human being is therefore able to evolve in a consciousness-based manner and work him or herself up to higher levels. Like with every plant and all other life forms, their life and their development proceed according to law-based determinations, so therefore a developmental step cannot simply be skipped. By withdrawing the necessary nourishment, however, the growth can be inhibited or curbed. If one thus withdraws the sunlight from a plant or an animal, then they wither on the outside and inside. If one restricts their living space, then here too an inner and outer atrophy is also the result. If one even withdraws nourishment and water from them, then they will become subject to the death. The same thing happens with the human beings, and indeed, in two respects. In the material sense, the consequences are exactly the same as with plants and animals, but also with regard to the consciousness form. The consequences are the same, namely, if the external influences necessary for the consciousness are withdrawn from the human being, then it atrophies miserably. Equally, such an atrophy occurs when wrong nourishment and liquids are given. If animals or plants are administered precisely dosed poisons, they atrophy. With excessive administration, however, they will be killed. If, however, poisoned nourishment and liquids are given to the consciousness residing within the human being, then the consequences are the same. In this regard, these poisons are irrational teachings of all kinds, especially, however, those of the religions. These are, however, measured so precisely in a felonious manner that they do not kill the consciousness, but rather condemn it to the atrophy, just to the point where a resistance becomes hopeless. This, a malicious enslavement of the consciousness, serves to make the human being will-less, irrational, and dependent on dogmas of the insanity, through which he or she can be exploited without interruption and unscrupulously.